witnessing the execution of Irma Grese was more disturbing than expected. Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining me. On a cold morning in December 1945, inside a British prison far from the front lines of war, a young woman was led toward a decision that could no longer be reversed. She was not a general. She was not a politician. She did not design strategy or sign orders at a desk in Berlin. She was 22 years old. By the time she reached the wooden platform, the world she had served no longer existed. The regime that shaped her beliefs had collapsed, its symbols stripped away, its authority erased. What remained was a single question, one that still unsettles historians today. How does justice respond when cruelty was carried out not by distant leaders, but by ordinary people shaped, rewarded, and empowered by a system? This is not simply a story about punishment. It is a story about responsibility, indoctrination, and how power can turn youth into instruments of terror, long before they understand the cost. Irma Grese was born in 1923 in Germany, into a country already drifting toward radicalization. Her early life was marked by instability and emotional loss. When her mother died, her family fractured, and Grace left school at a young age. Like many adolescents searching for structure and belonging, she found it not in family or education, but in ideology. The Nazi system offered clarity. It divided the world into simple categories: loyalty and betrayal, strength and weakness, belonging and exclusion. For young people, especially those with limited opportunity, it offered identity and purpose. Grese joined state youth organizations that shaped values early and relentlessly. These institutions did more than teach obedience. They rewarded it. Advancement came not through reflection or compassion, but through conformity and discipline. When Grese sought employment, she did not choose an ordinary profession. She pursued positions connected to the regime's enforcement apparatus. By her late teens, she entered the world of the concentration camp system, a structure built on hierarchy, punishment, and total control. Her training was brief, but the environment was immersive. New guards were taught to suppress empathy and assert dominance. Cruelty was not framed as excess. It was framed as duty. Over time, repeated exposure normalized behavior that would have been unthinkable elsewhere. Grese rose quickly, not because she questioned the system, but because she embodied it. Survivor testimonies later described her as highly visible within the camps. She enforced discipline personally and without hesitation. What made her presence especially disturbing was the contrast between her age and appearance and the authority she wielded. Former prisoners spoke of the psychological impact of that contrast. Youth, normally associated with vulnerability, became a symbol of unchecked power. In that environment, fear did not come only from punishment, it came from unpredictability. As the war turned against Germany, Grese was transferred between camps. Conditions deteriorated rapidly. Overcrowding, collapse of infrastructure, and administrative chaos intensified suffering. Yet even as the system began to unravel, patterns of behavior remained. When British forces liberated Bergen-Belsen in 1945, they encountered devastation on a scale that defied comprehension. Amid the collapse, Grese was identified, detained, and questioned. Unlike many others, she did not attempt to deny her role, nor did she express visible remorse. Her trial took place later that year as part of a broader effort to establish accountability. The proceedings were public, deliberate, and methodical. Testimony came from survivors, camp personnel, and investigators. Evidence outlined not only systemic abuse, but individual participation. Throughout the trial, observers noted Grese's demeanor. She appeared composed, sometimes detached. Responsibility was frequently deflected upward toward superiors and ideology. The familiar defense of obedience emerged again, not as justification, but as explanation. The court rejected it. The verdict reflected a post-war shift in legal thinking. Authority could no longer serve as insulation. Individuals were expected to answer for their actions, regardless of rank or age. Grese was sentenced to death. What followed was not immediate. Weeks passed. Clemency petitions were submitted. They were denied. The decision reflected the broader context of the moment, a determination to draw a clear moral boundary after years of systematic cruelty. In December 1945, Grese was transferred to Hamelin prison, where several convicted guards were held. The execution process was standardized, designed to be controlled and restrained. There would be no public crowd, no spectacle. Witnesses later described the atmosphere as tense but procedural. British officials were present to oversee legality. Medical personnel ensured formal compliance. The executioner, Albert Pierrepoint, approached his role with professional detachment. What troubled many present was not resistance or defiance, but normality. Grese reportedly spoke briefly. She asked for the process to be completed quickly. There was no final speech, no attempt to justify or explain, just a request for speed. Accounts of her final moments vary. Some described visible fear, others recalled composure. What remains consistent is the unsettling contrast. A young woman, shaped by ideology, facing consequences designed for adults who had exercised power without restraint. Afterward, her body was removed quietly. There was no marked grave, no memorial. History did not preserve her for sympathy, but neither did it allow her to disappear. The reaction to her execution was complex. For survivors, the sentence represented acknowledgement, not closure, but recognition. For observers, especially those present, it raised uncomfortable questions. How had someone so young become capable of such behavior? Where did personal responsibility begin, and where did indoctrination end? Even the executioner later reflected on the experience. Pierrepoint, who would carry out many sentences in his career, reportedly found this one uniquely disturbing, not because of resistance, but because of the age and ordinariness of the condemned. Grese's case continues to provoke debate because it resists simple classification. She was not a mastermind. She did not design the system, but she enforced it willingly. She was shaped by propaganda, rewarded by authority, and empowered before she fully understood the consequences of obedience. Her story illustrates something essential about authoritarian systems. They do not rely solely on older leaders or distant planners. They depend on young people, trained early, promoted quickly, and insulated from moral reflection. When such systems collapse, accountability arrives unevenly. Some escape, some are judged, and some, like Grese, become symbols of a broader failure. Her execution did not resolve the deeper problem. It did not answer how societies prevent the next generation from being shaped the same way. It did not explain why ideology finds fertile ground among the young. What it did do was expose a truth that remains relevant. Cruelty does not always wear the face of age or experience. Sometimes it wears the face of youth, taught to obey before it learns to question. The execution of Irma Grese was not meant to shock the world. It was meant to draw a line between obedience and responsibility, between indoctrination and choice, between following orders and answering for them. Yet the discomfort surrounding her case has never faded, because it forces us to confront a truth that extends beyond history. Evil does not always arrive as a monster. Sometimes it arrives as opportunity, structure, and belonging, offered to those who are young, uncertain, and eager to matter. Grese's story is not important because of how she died. It is important because of how she lived, within a system that rewarded cruelty and punished doubt. And the question history leaves us with is not only about her. It is about how easily power can shape the young, and how urgently societies must teach conscience before obedience. Because once obedience replaces judgment, justice always arrives too late.